Well, hello and welcome back, my friend. This week I'm being joined by D'Angelo Stefani. And D'Angelo has had this transformation that just goes from one where you want to be the victim, you have the reasons to be a victim, to where he made a decision, and you can see that time, you can see that milestone of where he made that decision and said, I'm going to take this, life, this path into my own hands and be accountable for where I go, regardless of what happened. And it doesn't make it right, doesn't make it easy, but it's one of those that you just get to that line in the sand where you're like, no more, I'm done. I want something different. I want something better. And I want something that's what I want for my life. And you're going to see that in D'Angelo's story here. And just really excited to dive in. D'Angelo, how are you doing today, my friend?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Doing great. I appreciate it, buddy. Thanks for joining me here.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Well, let me jump off in the first question of asking you, D'Angelo, what does life look like for you today on the professional side of things?
Today, I am a founder and publisher of Haven House Publishing. We do sort of like my stories, those have overcame obstacles, challenges in life, and we let them tell their story in hopes it reaches somebody that really needs to hear it. Life is good right now. I'm putting books out. I'm spreading the word of hope and not dwelling in my past anymore. So things are good.
Yeah. And that's so powerful, is where it's like you're able to kind of make that change. You're not dwelling on the past, but it's like, this is my past.
Right.
And, dude, in our conversation, I mean, it's one of those, it's like, hey, this is what went on, but this isn't who I am. And I love that aspect because that's so powerful. And it, just like you've made that change, it allows us to make that shift and have a different life, like you're talking about, that you're living now. What does it look like right now on the personal side of things?
Wow, believe it or not, I'm married, and I have a daughter and two sons, and my wife's a mental health nurse. She's been my rock. I've been in other relationships that in my lifestyle in the past don't last for more than probably a month, Yeah. And this is the girl that I could be honest with about my past. She accepts me. She accepts what happened, and we're all about moving forward. And that's what I've needed in my entire life, is somebody to just kick me in the butt when I get down, and just say, hey, you're better than this. Let's just keep it moving. So personally, that's where I'm at. I got a great group of friends that are supportive, and just life is good. Like I told you beforehand, I went floating on the river for the first time, and I just couldn't believe. I would look around and see, these are my friends. These are really my friends.
Mm-hmm.
They're not drug addicts. They're not this. They're all professional working people. And personally, my life is what I've always wanted it to be.
Yeah. And you've moved from Boston. You're now out in Oklahoma. And we were kind of talking about the change and the shift. And that's a definite culture shift there, man.
Oh, the people here are so nice, though. I'll tell you that. And that's who they are. I haven't heard the F word one time since I've been here when asking for directions. So, I'm just like, this is where I need to be. This is perfect.
Yeah. No, it totally works out. Well, D'Angelo, let's take a step back and kind of look at things, because there was a time where it was really, really rough. And it's one of those we can look at, we're not stuck with who we are. Like, you have proven that, because if we went off of, the belief or the excuse that we can set out there, and I did this myself 100 times over, where it was, I am who I am. This is all I'm gonna be. D'Angelo, you, with where you were and the things that, the actions and decisions you had made, you're like 180 degrees from that, man. Like, I would never have like guessed like that. What? No, that must have been like he did that for a movie or something. That must have been a role he filled.
Right.
What was it like, that kind of set you up on that path before you made that decision of I'm done, I want something different?
Well, I guess we start when I was 5. I grew up in a home with drug addicts. My parents would put drugs in my bottle, so I think I became a drug addict at the age of 5. 4 or 5, and later on in life, that switch was flicked on again, and I just became a full blown heroin addict. I had a part of my life when about 19, 20 to 22, I actually went to nursing school and I got my RN license, and I still hadn't dealt with my childhood. I still kept those excuses in my pocket. I kept, this is why I do drugs. And people would say, oh, that's expected knowing where you came from. You grew up like that. One expects one to become a drug addict. So I played those cards for a long time. And I traded in my stethoscope for a needle and started shooting heroin because that's how I was dealing with my past. I didn't deal with it head on. I didn't even try to talk to anybody about it. I would do the exact opposite. D'Angelo came from a perfect family. His parents were well off. They did this, they did that. When in reality, I was homeless at 7 years old. I was living in unlocked cars on the streets by myself, and in and out of juvenile hall because it was much better than where I came from. Much better than my father's hands or my stepmother's mouth. Anything was better. So, and I carried that into my adulthood. I said, you know what, when things get bad, I'm going to pull one of these cards out. I'm going to do something stupid and they're going to understand why I do it. But it gets old. It really does. What had happened was I moved to Vegas and I met a girl. The next day we got married. And the day after that, we robbed the first of 13 banks. And it just went on for a month and a half. And finally, the FBI caught up to us. And I ended up going to federal prison for 13 years. While I was in federal prison, you don't really get a chance to work on yourself in prison, especially in the maximum security yard where I was at, because you're too busy trying to survive. There's no time for reflection. There's no time for plans for tomorrow. You're dealing with right here, right now, today. But when I was able to move to a lower custody, I actually got a chance to stop and spend a lot of time with myself, which was always uncomfortable for me. I hated myself. I blamed my childhood on myself. But I started thinking, you know what, D'Angelo, there's got to be something better. This is getting so old, so old. I was tired of overdosing. I died 3 times. Just tired of relationships that were built around the chaos that we shared, whether it was drugs or whether it was crime. And I just said, enough's enough. There's got to be a way I cannot be released the same person I was coming in. And the hard part was I didn't even know who I was coming in. I didn't know. I thought I was D'Angelo the bank robber. I never got a chance to figure out who I really was. But over time, I figured it out. And I don't have all the answers, but I'm doing good. I really am.
Yeah, I think that loss of identity and like having those excuses, those cards like you talked about, those cards are more of like what we identify with versus more knowing who we are, because we get lost so much in just that day-to-day survival.
Right.
As you started kind of delving into who is D'Angelo, like what were some of the first things that you figured out? Like what was the process of figuring that out?
It began with actually being honest, not only with myself, but with the counselors that I would see or the therapist. And the first thing that hit me was my childhood was not my fault. I was just a kid. I didn't ask for that. I dang near didn't want that. I wanted a normal childhood. I never got a chance to be a kid. So sometimes in my adulthood, I would still act like a kid because there were things that I never got to experience. I've never went to the high school dance. I got my GD when I was 15. But being honest with others and letting them know that, this is not what I want anymore. It was the catalyst for who I am today.
Mm. I know for myself and some of the guys that I've coached, like going from that self-loathing, that self-hatred, that often forgiveness, we think of forgiveness as like towards other people, right? The people that have hurt us and wronged us along the way. But there's also some shame or guilt towards ourself. And, how you're kind of realizing, talking through the process and realizing, hey, I didn't have my childhood. Was there forgiveness that you did towards yourself that helped you kind of like break free of like the negative feelings towards yourself?
Oh, definitely. Definitely. Once I begin the process of forgiving myself, I would write down things, incidents that happened in my childhood. My parents putting drugs in my bottle. Check, not my fault. My dad consistently belittling and physically abusing, not my fault. Whereas before, I carried around a bag full of reasons why my dad did that. And that's where the self-hate comes in. He did this because I wasn't good enough or because whatever the reason was.
Yeah. And how did you see as the forgiveness came about that it then changed your thinking about yourself to kind of help you move forward? Was that something you experienced?
Yeah, it was, I think it began physically. I would walk with my head a little higher. I wouldn't mind looking at myself in the mirror, and I didn't see the same little boy my dad saw. Now I was seeing somebody that was weird because even though I was in prison, I was supposed to be where I was at in life. This had to happen, and I accepted it. And I had two choices: continue work or grab those excuses and start feeling sorry for myself again. A big thing in my life was I never knew my mom. I grew up thinking my stepmom was my mom until I found my birth certificate. So I searched high and low for my mom, high and low. And now I'm at a point where who cares? She did whatever she thought she had to do, just like I've done what I thought I had to do. I hope she's well. I hope she's okay. But I don't need to hold on to that no more. And I in doing that, I've let go a huge part of the way I see myself.
When you look back at, you're getting ready to be released from prison, where do you see like the biggest transformation and change was for you versus when you went in and kind of had that victim mindset, right? That it's not just a physical prison, but then you've also got your own mental and emotional prison. Like you're now getting ready to be physically released. What had been released internally for you?
I think the biggest thing was I stopped living in the now. I knew that I had to have a plan. Not only did I have a plan, I had to have a backup plan and a backup plan of that and a backup plan of that. Because I'm a convicted felon. On paper, I'm an armed bank robber. I have kidnapping charges. I have threatening. I have a lot. On paper, I look like a really bad person. So I imagine myself putting that in front of an employer. Heck no, you're not getting a job. There's no way. So what's my backup plan of that? So I stopped living in the now and I started planning for the future. And I wrote down step by step what I was going to do when I get out. And if that didn't work, well, then I'm going to do this. Luckily, when I got out, I had a job 2 days later. I hit the ground running when I got out. I really did. And, I've had a lot of setbacks, a lot of obstacles I've had to, but instead of trying to run through them, I'd stop. Can I go over? Can I go under? Can I go around? How do I get across this obstacle? And it's worked out. Really has. I believe in myself now. Before when I was getting ready to get out of prison, that's one thing I learned too, is have belief in myself. If I don't believe in myself, who else is going to?
Yeah. And to be able to look at yourself, and even when those times of doubt come about, to then recenter and kind of like re-insist almost. I don't know how else to, really say it, but that's kind of what it feels like, because you're like, I don't really feel like this, but this is who I am now, right?
Exactly.
So when you look back and it's like other guys that were in prison didn't have like that same mindset, and not just looking at the here and now, but like you had the backup plan to the backup plan to the backup plan. You're looking, longer term. What do you see in their actions of not having that plan? Did they kind of repeat the same pattern, or like what happened for them?
I've stayed in contact with quite a few guys, because believe it or not, you meet a lot of good people in prison. And like you said, you're either a product of your environment and those are your beliefs, or you play the cards you're given, But I had a lot of guys in there that, I can't get out and get a job because I'm a felon, and they've returned to prison because they're still in that mindset that they can't do nothing. I remember being in prison, and I said, you know what? When I get out, I'm either getting my nursing license back, or I'm working in some form of healthcare, or I'm going to start my own publishing business. I've done 2 out of the 3 after being told time and time again, you can't do it. You're not going to be able to do it. That's your beliefs. Those aren't my beliefs. And that's not even reality, because you don't know what's going to happen. So you can tell the guys in prison that, well, then you have the guys in prison that say, oh, when I get out, I'm going to do this and this and that. And they shoot so big that when they don't reach that, they go back to where they were and they return to prison.
Yeah. Oftentimes it seems like our family and friends can be the ones that are the most critical or doubting of, what we share of, hey, this is the direction I'm going.
Exactly.
Was there like something you did different when it came to friends or family that doubted you, or were like naysayers, so that you're like, hey, you believe what you want to believe, this is what I'm after? Was there something different that you handled them like uniquely, or was it just the same as somebody off the street?
Well, honestly, friends and family didn't exist for me getting out of prison. I had nobody, but I always let my actions show while I was in prison. I was the one at the library. I was the one ordering all the books needed to do what I want to do. It's just not going to come to you. You have to work for it. So the family and friends, I got out the halfway house. I had nobody. I had $20 in my name. I was in a state where I knew nobody, because in the federal system, you go back to where you're sentenced out of. So I'm at the halfway house with nobody. I don't know anybody, but I still have my beliefs, and doubt crept in now and then. But like I said, I hit the ground running, and I haven't looked back since.
How have you kept making like growth and that forward momentum, kind of getting to that point of, hey, I'm now publishing books, and you said you're hitting 2 out of the 3.
Yeah.
How have you stayed on that path?
Consistency in not only my actions, but my beliefs. I try not to let negativity enter my life. Of course, it's going to happen now and then, but I always try to learn something from people I meet. And instead of just jumping on my emotions, I think that's what it is mostly. I stopped living by my emotions. I stopped letting somebody else dictate whether or not I have a good or bad day, or even whether or not I succeed. Because at the end of the day, it's up to me. Like you said, naysayers can say this, they can say that, employers can say no. But you know what? If I keep going and not give up, somebody's going to say yes.
Yeah, that perseverance and resiliency
Yes.
can be your best friends.
Because there is nothing, and I promise you this, Mike, there is nothing that I could go through today that is any worse than what I went through as a kid.
Yeah.
Nothing. I could survive that. I could survive anything.
Do you see it almost as like what you've experienced kind of gave you a special ability, I don't know, a strength to now be able to persevere and keep going when others would quit or say, "Hey, I've had enough." I mean, do you see that kind of, now that your perspective has changed and you're on a positive aspect, has that kind of been that fuel?
Definitely. I mean, I remember as a kid going through something and I would say, that's enough. I can't take any more. But yet it would progress. And so I would be, I can't take any more now. And it would go further. And so now as an adult, everything is just so small, whether it's before somebody cut me off in traffic. Oh, we're going to have problems now. Now I don't care. I don't care attitude, but it's positive. I don't care. It's not, I don't care what happens to me. I don't care about the little things because I'm focused. And I made a promise to myself, I will never go back to prison. There's no way. I was rehab when they put the handcuffs on me. They didn't even have to send me to prison. I learned my lesson. I'm good. So I don't know. I'm happy today. I can't explain it. I'm happy.
Yeah. It's one of those of your perspective and gratitude is there. Whereas before it was like those excuses are almost like so readily available.
Yeah.
It's like, why practice gratitude when I've got this,
right.
this ace up my sleeve, so to speak. You talked about your identity, being something that was coming about and being uncovered.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've also talked about awareness of like things around you, your thought patterns, what's going on, where you want to go. How did you like really begin to practice that and focus on, hey, I'm aware of what's going on, how I'm thinking, where I want to get, so that your perseverance and that resiliency that you've got, you're able to utilize it to the the best that you can.
Right. Well, I think that I would always keep my past in the rearview mirror, but there, so I can see it. So when I would encounter a situation, I knew it was down the other road. Like I kept that first and forefront. I knew by making this choice, that's the way I was going to go. Stopping and thinking and weighing my options, not living by my emotions was stuff I had never practiced. I never even heard of that stuff. Like that was like a foreign language. Wait, stop and think. What are you talking about? I'm doing this and I'm doing it to the fullest. Now I still do that, but I go the other way. I even if it doesn't work, I'll tell you what, it's not going to be as bad as if I go down that road. So that's what I do. I stop and think.
Cool. Yeah. Reacting and just kind of that knee jerk is kind of what got us into so many messes, man.
The worst. Back to my drug days, I would be driving down the street and I would see a bank and I just stop and rob it. There's no thinking about nothing. There's nothing to think about. This is what I'm going to do. And I don't care what happens. Now I do care. I do care what happens.
Yeah. It's a big difference in just the way you look at things and process, man.
Life looks so different for today. So different.
Yeah. 100%. What do you see that were like 2 to 3 things that, like, whether it was mentoring or books or, different resources, like what helped you to change your perspective to really grow? Because you and I didn't grow up with like, hey, this is how you have a good perspective. This is how you, gain awareness and,
right.
Figure out your identity. How did you go about that? Like, what were some things that gave you the insight and the knowledge that you lacked?
I think first and foremost would be talking to somebody, opening up, sharing your story. The world comes off your shoulders when you tell your story. It really does. You might not believe it. Some people might not, but it does. Just being honest with yourself too. That's most important. If you're not honest with yourself, change is not possible. Change is, and another thing, letting go of the past, like all the excuses we carried around, yeah, you may be justified in some areas, but there comes a time where you have to grow up. It really does. And growing up looks different for everybody, but for me, growing up was taking responsibility for what I did, not because of what my dad did, not because of what my mom did, but because of what I did. I put myself in prison. Nobody else put myself in prison. Just because my ex-wife testified, she didn't put me in prison. I put myself in prison. And that is huge, because then you can start the process of change. You can see why you're doing the things you're doing, and then just work on that.
Gotcha. How did you let go of the past? I know, like for myself and other guys I've talked to, it almost validates our negative actions,
Definitely.
right? It's so, how did you let go of the past, and what did that look like for you?
It looked like sitting in solitary confinement with a little lotto pencil and a piece of paper and writing. That's what did it for me. Writing out everything I could remember about my life, my childhood, and going line by line and just reliving them experiences. And yeah, there were tears, there was anger, there was a bunch of stuff, but it was healing for me, because that's when I realized I didn't do anything wrong. For me, the biggest thing in my life was guilt. You know, I don't care if I get killed during a robbery, because I'm nothing anyways. My dad's told me it a million times, so it must be true. So writing and just learning self-love was big for me, and forgiving my dad. My dad passed away. I haven't spoken to my dad since I was 13. He passed away about 4 years ago, and I never got the chance to tell him. I've written letter after letter to him, but he never got them. But just knowing that I can live in my beliefs, I'm sure he can see what's going on in my life. So it's kind of like a double whammy. Yeah, I'm doing good. And oh, by the way, Dad, you didn't ruin me, So
So you talked about, like the guilt being there, and guilt can be almost like this treble hook that just gets stuck in us and is hard to dislodge.
yeah.
How did you work through that and release that so that it's not, just, part of you, stuck to you, just clinging to you everywhere you go, and,
Right.
just every action you take?
Well, I still live with a lot of guilt, to be honest with you. I didn't wake up one day and all the sorrow and guilt was gone completely. No, certain areas of my life, yeah, it's gone, but I still have guilt. I mean, I left my sisters in that household. I still carry some of that around with me. They had to grow up when I ran away. But I think you figure out why you're feeling guilty about a situation, and you break it down. And you at the end of the day, you have to either forgive yourself and realize it's not your fault, or if it is your fault, make amends with that person if you can. And if you can't, keep it moving.
So you've talked a number of times here about writing things down. So it sounds like journaling is a big thing for you. Is that correct?
Huge, gigantic. I carry a notebook everywhere I go.
Okay, that was what I was going to ask you, is like, how do you make sure to capture your thoughts? I know you've talked in other interviews that like you've got a really good memory.
Yeah.
And so, it's like, but you're carrying a notebook, writing things down. And then once you've written it down, what do you do with it?
I go back and I tear it up. If it's an anger issue, I'll write the word anger and why I'm angry at that moment. And then I do this thing I learned from my psychologist called a camera check. And I'll go back and I'll say, if a camera was watching the situation right now, do I really have a reason to be angry? And I'll replay it through somebody else's eyes. And 9 times out of 10, I'm like, that was dumb. There's no reason for me to be angry. It just, stuff happens. So I do that a lot. I really do.
So just so I'm sure on understanding the process. So you're putting yourself in the position of like a camera, as if this is like a
Yeah.
movie being filmed, to
Right.
see like what emotional triggers there would be if you weren't you. Is that correct?
Exactly. Like if a lady cuts me off in line, I'll go back and I'll look at it through a third person's view, and then I'll stop and think maybe she's in a hurry. Maybe she has a relative that's sick. Maybe she really has to get somewhere that she needs to be. So it goes from her cutting me in line to just her being in a hurry. And it is what it is. Whereas before, oh no, you're not cutting me in line. It's not going to happen. And that way of thinking leads to a whole nother sort of issues. Whereas you just, yeah, she's in a hurry. I change a lot of my wording during my day. Like instead of saying I'm angry, I don't even use the word anger anymore. I just use, upset. And why are you upset? Well, this and this happened. Well, if you look at this and this, you can see you really don't have a reason to be upset. But if you are upset, it's okay. It's okay to be upset. It's what you do with that is the most important thing.
Is that something that you've also used when you look back at those like childhood wounds and like the things that your dad did and other people did to you? Is that something that works there as well, or is it something that you just use like now going forward kind of thing?
I've tried to go back, and in some instances it does work.
Okay.
But in most instances, there's no reason why it should have happened. There's no justification for certain things, if I was to do my so-called camera check on something my father did, I'll tell you what, I'd never be in the wrong. And I had every reason to react the way I did. So sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah, I get it. And as far as forgiveness, like you talked about, forgiving your dad, the way I looked at it with my parents was that I forgave them.
Mhm.
What they did wasn't right, but it was up to me how I handled it. Is that kind of the way you see forgiveness, or is that a different perspective that you have on what it means with your dad?
I think for my dad, I went from being angry and sad and thinking how just one I love you could have cleaned up so much mess to maybe he didn't know any better. Not feeling sorry for him, but maybe that's how he was raised. I don't know how he was raised. Maybe that's all he knew, and that's how I deal with it.
Yeah.
Because I don't have any other way. I can't say, it's okay what you did, Dad. It's not okay. It's far from okay. But if that's all you knew, I can't blame you. I can't.
Yeah. I know from my perspective, looking at my dad, you talked about him saying, hey, I love you.
Yeah.
Very much on the same plane here. But it was one of those of the way I looked at it was he wasn't equipped and in a place to be able to give what I wanted. And so it was just like he did his best, didn't excuse it. But what would I want, from like my children? Because I know that there were times, a lot of times, that I failed them and repeated the pattern that I had received. Right. And it's like, how would I want my children to treat me? And then it was the challenge was, okay, now I get to turn around and extend that forgiveness to my dad, which is what I would want my children to give me.
Right.
It's often harder to give what we want than, it's just, it can be a challenging task.
It's tough. You talked about your father giving you things. In my book, I wrote a line that's always stuck with me. It's my dad failed to give me the things that I needed in life, so there's no wonder why I grew up to become a thief.
Yeah.
And I was filling holes, taking things, stealing to fill holes that I had in my life. So I definitely know what you're talking about.
Yeah. You talked about having children as well.
Yeah.
Neither you nor I were equipped to be a healthy dad.
No.
How did you discover what a healthy dad looked like, in raising your children?
It was tough at the beginning. I would catch myself all the time reenacting my childhood. Not so much on that level, but just my words, where when they would come to me and really need my advice, I'd just be like, go away, I'm doing something. And then I stopped doing that. And now I don't care what I'm doing. If they need me, I'm there. And if it's frivolous, which it usually is, buying them a Minecraft game or a skin off something or another, I've bought millions of those. I don't even know what they are, but I'm there for them. So I'm learning. I learn by their reactions, by the things I say in their face. I can tell if they're looking like I was when I was a kid, I'm doing it wrong. I really am. But don't get it wrong. I'll put my foot down quick. You're not getting away with stuff. You're not growing up the same way I did. There's no way.
Yeah. There's a way to create boundaries for our children and yet love them in the midst of it, is what I hear from you.
Yes.
So, yeah. Man, D'Angelo, I'm just blown away by the difference from where things started out and just the transformation both in who you are and, how you're now changing the family dynamics. You're not passing along what you and I inherited. You're changing that, right? And being as healthy and loving and yet still protective. You're still being that loving father. And there's two sides of it. So, man, hats off to you. Yeah, I mean, funny? Dude, it's not easy.
What's funny real quick is that you and I, growing up how we did, we could spot BS a mile away, especially in our kids. Like, we can see it coming. Could be like, no, that might have worked. No, that doesn't work today.
Yeah.
I love being a dad. I do. My kids are awesome. They think they're so slick, but I'll tell you what, I've been there, done that, and they're great. So my kids are great.
What's the one thing that has surprised you that you enjoy the most out of being a dad that you just didn't see that before you became a dad?
I think one of my sons is 18, one's is 6, and then my daughter, she's grown. But my 6-year-old, what I enjoy the most out of this little kid is watching him learn or watching his wheels turn in his head when you give him advice, him trying to figure out how does this apply to me playing Minecraft, or just the little things, and the hugs goodnight. I never had that growing up. The I love yous all the time, the random you're a great dad, stuff like that. I love it.
Yeah, I can appreciate that, man. Well, D'Angelo, thank you so much for sharing your story today, man, and giving hope, because it's like, man, when we're in the midst of it, it can seem so overwhelming. And like, we do have a sentence, right? That we're stuck there and this is just who I am and the lot that I've been given. But, dude, the change that you've gone through is the hope that we need. And I so appreciate you sharing that as well. How can guys reach out and connect with you outside of this podcast?
I mean, I'm on Facebook, D'Angelo Stefani. I have an email. It's D, and then my last name, Stefani, 1976 at Gmail. Anybody needs to talk. Anybody wants some advice. I have a little bit that might work. I have a lot that probably won't work. So don't take my word for it. But I'm excited to hear from people. I really am. I want that. I mean, that's why I went through the stuff I went through. So today I can share my story. There's nothing in my life I would change. Nothing. I'm happy, and that's all I've ever wanted.
That's a huge statement, man. I appreciate it. Well, D'Angelo, thank you again, my friend. I'm grateful to have you here.
No problem, Mike. You're awesome, man. Keep up the good work.
Thank you, brother.
All right, buddy.